o older, for instance, marriage vows that the church, like uses in its ceremonies of, like yung sinasabi pa doon na man and wife, right? So the man seems to be autonomous. So the man, meron siyang wife. But now we have revised this. Usually they use husband and wife. So making sure that at least linguistically, the terms are more equal. But then this is also where we get the idea that, like that when I said earlier that part of the duty of the woman is to make sure if the man desires, like some kind of sexual gratification, then she must, like give it to him. Like that's part of, for instance, even in church, yung obligation ng wife sa husband, like you submit yourself to your husband. You must be able to take care of him, obey him, love him. Diba? Parang ganun yan na nasa marriage vows. Whereas for the husband, you love and you protect. So, iba na kaagad yung kanilang terms of relationship. So, now, when we go to Philippine mythology, it's very interesting because it seems to be rather more egalitarian because of the myth in our originary myth, our myth of origin. Supposedly, man and woman came out of a bamboo shoot that was split apart, and like on the one side you have malakas, on the other side you have maganda. So parang equal sila in terms of creation, sabay silang lumabas. They're like, but what is the but? Well, the idea, first of all, that one is malakas and one is maganda is already gendered, and we're, like all these concepts of what it means to be malakas, why must the man be malakas, like where did it come from? Obviously also comes from, like an era when we had already been inculcated in the so-called traditional roles of men and women. Kasi bakit hindi si malakas ang maganda at hindi si maganda ang malakas? I mean, sa pangalan pa lang, in how we understand them to be, nakapasok na yung gender concepts dun eh. So I'm not really sure if that is better than, or I'm not even sure if there's anything better in this, but in terms of, for instance, notions of equality, then perhaps this still needs to be rethought. Rethought. Kasi yung kwento naman, hindi ko alam kung kailan lumabas kung saan lumabas. And because it's a kwento, I think we can recreate stories of how we imagine ourselves. The media actually plays a very important role in perpetuating gender concepts, and at the same time in changing gender concepts. So I think the media, especially today, yung multimedia, is really at that crucial point. And media practitioners must take a decisive, I think, position in what they want to, in how they want to influence their audience, because one way or the other they form people's way of looking at things, way of imagining themselves, despite what some other media practitioners say, that they're only giving people what they want. They may be giving what people want, but if they suggest something else to the people, I'm sure that this may either be accepted or rejected. But the thing is, like the idea that they're just giving people what they want, they're actually, like giving the same old things, what they think, like people want. And maybe, perhaps, like that's also what they want. By they, perhaps the status quo, the dominant in, among the media practitioners who do know that they have a say, who do know that they can influence how people think. And it becomes very crucial, to make sure that one way or the other we are able to control how people think. So, pumapasok din dito yung power. This is really, power dynamics. To what extent are we going to, push the boundaries of our, social imagination? And the media, is very powerful in this. As you said before, the technologies are basically oral or written, in a later period. But now, well, as we say, students hardly read books, but it doesn't mean that they do not read. They actually read the internet, movies, even songs are also read in the sense of being understood and being interpreted. So messages are coursed through these different, media. So and also the multimedia being so fast, mabilis yung change eh. So it also gives us the sense of, well, as they say, the borders had been transgressed or broken by the multimedia. For instance, when I'm not even sure if chatting, for instance, is considered multimedia. But when, for instance, people chat, they may chat with someone from, another country, and you have, let me use a, well, for lack of better term, a cross-pollination of ideas. People here in the Philippines might think that, oh, this is how, Americans think. And so maybe it is the correct way of thinking, or maybe it's not. But then they have that sense that this is how, they think. But in a way, they are indeed exposed to those ways of thought. So in that sense, yung ideas that we can put in the media is I think it's a very good avenue. No? So yung cross ng yung traffic of ideas is very fast, open. Yeah. Maybe why it's also really crucial for media practitioners to intervene. When I say intervene, I am reminded of how, I could actually be such a control freak. Because that's one of the dangers. I mean, as you said, kahit sino pwede mag-contribute, no? So, kahit yung idea, yung pumapasok tuloy sa ating idea is that these ideas are okay. But at the same time, actually, even this multimedia may also be venues for perpetuating ideas that may not necessarily be just or fairer. And by just and fairer, I'm saying this in the hope that, ideas of putting women at par with men would be fairer and more just. Pero, I mean, in the multimedia, for instance, yung mga gender stereotypes are perpetuated. For instance, as I said, kung nakikipag-chat ka sa someone, from the States, and one of the stereotypes I've learned of young women in the States, for instance, is their love for lipstick. So if someone you're chatting with, constantly talks about how she could not live without her lipstick, and you in the Philippines thinking, what is, ano ba ang in, or how do people act? Then you might think, well, I should also buy a lipstick, diba? So parang merong chance na na-perpetuate yun doon. And especially if we have the idea that, we look up to these people as models. So, nakaka-influence din sila. I mean, yung ganong gender stereotype that because you are a young woman, then you should have lipstick, or you cannot live without lipstick, or that you are a shopaholic. Ganon din, dami-dami. Nung araw, di ba, sa mga, just talking about all these women stereotypes. Nung araw in magazines, you have all these quizzes that actually perpetuate, gender stereotypes. Ngayon, nasa internet na rin itong mga quizzes na to. Kita ko noon sa isang Facebook page nung ka-member ko sa Facebook. Ano bang tawag ng friend? that she took this quiz, and what did, like, I forgot what the quiz was about, but the result was that she was basically a shopaholic. Uh, or that, like, are you flirty, ano ba? Flirty, sexy, or what's the other one? A slut? So, so you take the quiz, and, like, all these ideas na parang nagsicirculate in the international cyberspace, di ba? Seems to, like, make all these ideas even more normative than anything else. So you take the quiz, and then, okay, I'm sexy, or I'm flirty, or I'm a slut. So on the one hand, it makes, like, all these ideas that before we could not even utter, like a woman, like, claiming herself in this light, weird way that I'm a slut. What does it mean to be a slut? So medyo siguro na iba yung conception natin, moving away from, like, conservative ideas of the self. So in that, implicit is that you are allowing a young woman to affirm her sexuality. Pero, well, as academics, we might want to think pa rin, like, ano naman ba yung alternative ideas that we are presenting. I think, well, in this day and age, because as you put it, like, the idea of development seems to be from the 70s. Well, it is, in a way. I mean, as a theory, development theory, actually, earlier than the 70s, yung post-World War II, ano yata yan concept, propagated by those in the developed countries to promote the idea that those, we probably can say, formerly colonized countries, or for them who are not yet at par with their development, economically speaking and politically, well, that development concept is actually a set of theories to make sure that those countries may, one way or the other, become at par with the so-called developed countries. So, meron ka agad comparison at saka meron ka ng pinanggagalingan na seemingly the norm, and that is, like, the developed countries. And what are the developed countries? Western countries, mainly the United States and, well, Europe prior to the Second World War, siguro. But, like, the idea of the reconstruction of Europe naman follows from this idea of, like, yung development. Development, but para sa kanila iba yata kasi sa kanila parang restoration of what had been. Unlike, for instance, in countries like ours, like post-colonial countries, underdeveloped, as, like, was described by, the US President, sino ba yun? Si Harry Truman yata yun in 1949. Like, that's how he described all those countries. And that is how also they've promoted the idea that it is actually part of their white man's burden to make sure that all those undeveloped countries be developed. So a set of mainly economic theories on how to make sure that they, use Taglish, like, makahabol doon sa mga developed countries. As I was saying, we have the development concept. The idea of women in development became popularized, like, or was popularized sometime in the 1970s with the, like, with the realization that it is impossible, for instance, for these societies, for these countries to be developed if one half of their population, I mean the women population, are not part of the development process. Not part meaning recognizing that women are not productive in the economic sense, because many of these women do not work. They are, like, in the houses doing reproductive work, unpaid work. In other societies, because of the conception that women only eventually end up being wives and mothers, so they do not invest in these women anymore in terms of education. So women's literacy is very much lower than men's literacy. So all these realizations gave development theories at the time, and also feminists, like from the second wave, group of feminists in the West, like realized that women should be part of the development process for nations to move forward, for nations to achieve this developed status. Then women must be part of like that process. The women in development is part of this strategy, or part of the strategies of like development. So it ensures that women be part of the development process by making sure that women get employment, that women participate economically in whatever way that they could. Those who had been educated, like may, for instance, have careers, professional careers, and those who are not educated may actually participate economically in countries like the Philippines in informal ways. For instance, yung mga nagtitinda, like magkakaroon sila ng economic participation, they earn money on their own. Well, it eventually adds to their empowerment. Because if they have the capacity to earn, then they might actually eventually have the capacity to decide, to be decision maker. So these are, like the important things in the early, I think, yung idea of feminism, liberal feminism yata yun. The idea that women must be economically independent is first, and that they must also be able to, like decide, like the course of their life. Here at the Center for Women's Studies, because we are in the year 2009, actually even in our beginnings from 1988, parang nag-move away na naman tayo din dun sa idea of women in development. And the Center for Women's Studies mostly follows the idea of gender and development, yung GAD, because this is also the strategy taken on by the Philippine government through the NCRFW. So yun yung strategy. Anong pinagkaiba? Well, kasi one of the weaknesses of the strategy called Women in Development that theories found was that it seemed to have promoted the idea of the double burden, women's double burden of work. Because on the one hand, they are now participating in the economic activity, but on the other, hand, all the reproductive work had not been properly distributed. So, double burden, yung tinatawag ng some Western scholars, in particular si Arlie Hochschild yata yung coin ng term, yung second shift. So after working in the public sphere, either in the factories or in the office, like once they get home, they have work waiting for them, and that is, like the housework, which is, like full-time work as well. I mean, having to do the laundry, like cook and iron, like instead of, like just resting from your full day's work, hindi pa tapos. And then, of course, there's the continued nurturing of the children. So yung GAD, gender in development, now introduces this idea of gender. Gender as a concept which assumes that, or looks at the social relations between men and women. So when we talk of gender, supposedly, we're not really just talking of women, but we're looking at the relationship between men and women. Yun yung assumption, men and women. But these days, parang nandun na rin yung other genders or other sexual orientations. But in many, like in many fora din naman, sometimes the confusion with the term gender is that when we talk of gender, ang assumption pa rin ng mga tao is we're basically talking of women. Bakit naging gender? Well, I'll probably talk about that, like a little while, so in a little while. So but just to go back to like what do we do here at the Center for Women's Studies in terms of development of women in development. Maybe we are more into idea of empowerment, which yung idea of women's empowerment